note, you missed a great talk from Jordan Wright. You'll definitely want to go back and watch that on the recording. We're getting ready to start our next talk with Luke Crouch. Before I want to give a couple of quick updates or quick announcements. If this is your first time as a BSidesOK virtual event, you're in good company. It's all of our first time. We're trying to figure this out as we go. But it wouldn't be BSidesOK without free swag. So a couple things, if you would like some swag, like a t-shirt, some stickers and stuff like that, don't update your Eventbrite registration, add the swag tickets. You're going to click on tickets over on the right, just like you did when you registered. Now there's a new swag ticket that you can add. You do that, give us your mailing address, and we will mail you out swag, with the exception that it has to be within the United States. So unfortunately, we can't ship out around the world this time. Also, if you want lunch, if you go to TinySI, so tiny.si/BSOK, tiny.si/BSOK, you can get a free $15 discount for Uber Eats. So you do have to use the Uber Eats mobile app to order that. But that's our way of bringing you free lunch. Also, if you haven't joined the conversation already, jump on slack.techlahoma.org. That's where all the conversations go. We've got several hundred people and they're already talking about the tracks, the channels for each track. And so we can talk about Luke's conversation as he goes, critique him, provide some feedback and questions and that kind of stuff. Lastly, there's an awesome capture the flag going on. You can join that in the Techlahoma Slack. It's a BSidesOK-SCTF. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Luke Crouch. And I'll let you introduce yourself. Sorry about that. It's all you, Luke.
Cool, thanks. So my name's, I got an intro slide here. My name is Luke. I'm a privacy and security engineer for Firefox. I'm also a board member of Techlahoma. So today I'm going to give a talk that I have given before, a little bit odd. I can't see everybody's reactions, but I gave this talk about 3 years ago at BSides, and it is about crypto from 500 BC to present. The nice thing about crypto in 500 BC is it hasn't changed in the last 3 years. It's still the same that it was. So I'm going to walk through and try to get through as much of this as I can in 43 minutes. There's a lot to cover. And if we have time and I can get some sort of feedback from Slack, let me put Slack over here on this window and track one. Yeah, okay, so I'm looking at the Slack track one, BSidesOK-track one channel on the Techlahoma Slack. So if you have questions that you want to put into there, I will try to keep tabs on that as we go. I'm probably only going to get us up through the crypto that goes to World War II, which in my opinion is some of the coolest crypto. And I think the reason that I sort of love giving this talk and loved researching all of this is when I came into security, it was very much from a software development, web development background. And so crypto felt like the sort of dark magic that I wouldn't understand. I grew up with muggles. What's going to happen when I try to do security and don't know the basics of crypto? And learning crypto from sort of the very first crypto up to modern crypto helped really sort of ground me in the sort of crypto fundamentals. And so that's what I try to convey with this talk, is to get people to sort of think about the very early primitive crypto fundamentals that fit in your head pretty quickly and easily. So we're not going to do much math because I don't really like it and it's too easy to get wrong. And the crypto engineering team at Mozilla always tells me to tell people when I talk about crypto, don't try to make your own crypto, and be extra careful with how you use crypto. So don't listen to this talk and then think that you can roll your own crypto. You probably shouldn't. You should probably just use off-the-shelf crypto that's been developing for years and years. The code book is an outstanding book. I'm basically going to follow the history, the timeline that Simon Singh outlines in this book. So that's a great resource. Journey into Cryptography at the Khan Academy is also a great resource. So this also covers some of the modern crypto and some of the, has great math visuals for it. And then if you really want to get into it, Cryptography on Wikipedia has sort of links into all of the nefarious dark corners of crypto. So we're going to start, when I say cryptography, we're going to start with what's called steganography, which is just hiding messages. And so an example of the earliest hiding messages would be in ancient Greece, Hestiaeus of Miletus shaves people's heads and then would write a message on their heads and let their hair grow back. And then that messenger would basically travel to some other place, shave their heads, and now you can see the message again. Another example of steganography, just hiding messages, in 480 BC, Demaratus would basically write into these wood carvings and then cover it with wax, and then write into the wax a sort of false message on top. So someone intercepting a messenger on the road would see one of these tablets, see the message on top and think that was the message. And when they got where they were going, they would melt the wax off and see the real message underneath. So this is hiding messages, steganography. And then this example from ancient China, not exactly sure when, but we know that they would write messages on these strips of paper. They would wad them up and put them inside of wax balls. They would eat that. And then the messenger would go to some new place and retrieve it when they got to the new place. And then the first invisible ink starts to come out around the 1st century AD. This was Pliny the Elder used the milk of the Techlahoma plant, which was heat activated. So you could use this and write messages and then just heat it up to see it later. So then if we get into sort of what you might think of more traditionally as actual cryptography, which is encrypting messages, we have the very sort of earliest ciphers were transpositional ciphers. And this is basically just anagrams and moving letters around. And the strength of a sort of anagram is sort of deceptively really good. For example, this short sentence is 35 letters long, which equals 50 with lots of zeros, distinct arrangements. And if you could make 1 check per second of every single anagram of 35 letters, it would still take you 1 trillion billion years to check all of them. So that's actually pretty good, even just for an anagram. But the drawbacks of using this sort of like a random anagram is that it would be impossible for an intended recipient to actually know which sort of reversing of the anagram was correct. You might get multiple false positives. And so then you have to get into algorithms and keys. If you want to do an anagram with sort of an algorithm and a key, one algorithm is called a rail fence cipher. And the algorithm is you write the message diagonally across some number of rows. And so in this case, your key is how many rows. So in this sort of picture example, we have defend the east wall, and it's been written over 2 rows. So if you were to do, let's say they are attacking from the north, and you were to write it over 4 rows, then it would come out as this TEKOOHRA, right? So then the recipient would basically see this TEKOO. They would draw their own grid with 4 rows and as many columns as letters in the message. And then when they write it all out, they can see the original message. So the next sort of step in cryptography is cryptanalysis. Cryptography is sort of making encrypted messages, and cryptanalysis is breaking encrypted messages. And so the history of cryptography is really the history of code makers and code breakers fighting it out over the centuries. To break a rail fence cipher, it's actually pretty sort of straightforward. You just use a brute force key search. So you try a bunch of numbers of rows by hand. And for most messages, that's gonna work in a reasonable amount of time. There was also this machine called the Skiddly, which was used as early as 700 BC, which essentially was just doing the rail fence cipher, but with a tool. So it was a cylinder, and you would wrap parchment around it, and then you would write your message on it. So you could either wrap it around horizontally, vertically. You could write the letters either in the strip or across the strip. And the algorithm here was essentially just wrap the message around a cylinder, and the key was the diameter of the cylinder. So again, breaking that would be straightforward with brute force. You would just try a bunch of different cylinders and wrap the piece of paper around a bunch of different size cylinders until one of them sort of lines up and makes sense. So after transpositional ciphers, the next one is sort of what we all probably more think of and when we think of cryptography is substitutional ciphers, which is changing letters into other letters. And so one of the earliest examples of this is the Hebrew Atmash cipher. And so Atmash stands for Aleph Tav Beth Shin, which was just kind of explaining what it was. They would take the plain Hebrew alphabet and then they would reverse it and put it underneath the plain alphabet and then use that as substitutions, right? So this is actually used in the Old Testament a lot. The Atmash cipher is used, if you ever see references to Sheshach, it is the same as Babylon. It's just reversed. It's just been through this Atmash cipher. So if you were to break the Atmash cipher, you could just look at the context because it wasn't really used for secrecy. It was actually just used as kind of like a literary device. So it was just sort of a Hebrew literary device that it was sort of a delightful thing that people would find, you know, these reversed words in the text. So one of the earliest sort of substitutional ciphers that we would use for secrecy would be the Caesar cipher. And this is probably one everyone's heard of, the most popular sort of early ciphers, and it was around 50 BC. And the algorithm here is you replace each letter with some other letter that's K positions down the alphabet from plain text letter. And so an interesting note is that Julius Caesar used a K of 3 and Augustus Caesar used a K of 1. This was a little bit so you could tell who was actually probably writing the message. This is kind of just how it looks if you were to depict it. And in a lot of the slides coming up, I'm going to have this sort of standard of doing the plain alphabet and then the cipher alphabet underneath it. So the plain alphabet is in lowercase, the cipher alphabet is in uppercase. And again, breaking this was basically the same as breaking Skittily. You would just do a brute force because there's only 25 possible numbers that you could try. But what if you did a non-shifted, so more of a random substitution cipher? So you're still replacing each letter with another letter, but your key is not a number of shifts, it's now any other cipher alphabet. So if you think about, back to our anagram example, if you had 26 letters to rearrange, you would have 400 and that many zeros, possible rearrangements. And if you could check a message against one of those once per second, it would still take you 120 and that many zeros years to break that. So an example key that might just be an anagram of the alphabet is here. But this is hard to memorize, and so you have to write it down. And once you have to write something down, now you have this key secrecy problem, which becomes the perennial problem of cryptography throughout the ages, is once you have a key to encryption, how do you keep that thing safe? So key secrecy actually is like, from very early on to modern days, one of the perennial fundamental problems of cryptography. And so if it's hard to memorize, could we create, instead of a random anagram, could we create a pseudo-random key that was easier to memorize? And so a way to do this is to start with a key phrase, like Julius Caesar, and you remove the duplicate letters, and then you start your cipher alphabet with those letters, and you continue the cipher alphabet. I wonder if this is showing up here. You continue the cipher alphabet from the last letter and omitting the ones that are already in the key phrase. So you're going to get slightly fewer possible keys, but this would be a super easy way to memorize a small key phrase and then derive a full encryption key out of just a small piece of key material called the key phrase. And this is also something we see that came up and comes up a lot in modern cryptography, is using a small piece of key material and extrapolating to get an entire key out of it, to get a suitable key for the algorithm you're working with. So that trick was actually considered to be unbreakable for about 800 years. People were using these substitution ciphers using key phrases, and no one thought you could beat that. Until in about 800, about the 9th century AD, Al-Kindi wrote an essay called On Decrypting Encrypted Correspondence, where he explained frequency analysis attacks. And a frequency analysis attack relies on the fact that in any language, letters are going to appear with some frequency. So if you've all heard or seen Wheel of Fortune, R, S, T, L, and E are popular letters, and the actual English frequency letters are here. E is very, very popular, then T, A, O, I, N, S, H, and on down the line. And so the way this works is that you would have some amount of ciphertext, and you would look at your plain alphabet looks like this. You know what the frequency of letters is in English. And at the bottom, you look at your ciphertext and you look at those frequencies of the letters that are happening in the ciphertext. And from that, you might say H is the most popular, so that's E. W is second most popular, so that's T. Then you would take that and apply it into the ciphertext, and you would start to find these little patterns where you got a couple right. And this is called cribs. So when you're doing cryptanalysis, this is called a crib, when you find sort of something that you think you have kind of a foothold in breaking. So if you see E, T, T, E, and you know there's letters on the end of it, if you guess that that's L and R, you can now take that L and that R and put it into the cipher alphabet, the O and the U, were L and R. And then if you go back and reapply that, you look at your frequency and say, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Once you've done that, you can go back and replace all of those, and you find other things. So once you get a foothold into breaking a message, you start to get more progress. So you see another place where it says letter with one character on the end of it, and you think, okay, that's an S, and now I've found the S. And that seems to line up too. And now in this particular example, we see UVW and UVW, and they're just backwards 3 spaces from the other UVW. And so now we know this is a Caesar shift cipher of 3. So that one was a little too easy because you did Caesar shift. But there's an example in the code book where it looks at, suppose you have sort of a frequency distribution where it's not super obvious or as obvious, and you try to apply the basic rule of just, hey, the top 3 letters are the top 3 letters, and you go back to your cipher alphabet, plugging that in, and you come up with nonsense. These 3 words at the bottom are just nonsense. Like, okay, that's not right. So if you focus on those 3 most frequent letters and say, okay, some combination of these 3 is probably some combination of these 3, right? And then you bring in some other frequency rules, which are known in languages. So in English, vowels appear before and after, consonants avoid other letters, E appears almost before and after any other letter, and T is rarely seen before these other ones. Then you can start to do things like you can look at the neighboring frequency of the ciphertext, the letters against each other. And you might spot something that looks down at the bottom like, okay, P seems to be avoiding a lot of letters. O avoids 7 completely, X avoids 8, and P avoids 17. So P is probably the consonant, right? You'd see other things like some of these letters occur twice right next to each other, and EE occurs a lot more than AA. And so you can make this sort of educated guess, right? X is on its own, A happens on its own. So let's take some of these guesses and go apply them. I'm skipping a little bit, sorry. But we're gonna apply this cipher guess to the text. And now with this sort of more educated guess, we see cribs start to appear. So there's a 3-letter word that appears 6 times that ends with HE, and the cipher letter is the L. And so if we guess that that is a T, we take the T back into the ciphertext. We also see these other 3-letter words pop up that starts with A, and it's a very common one, and the cipher letters are P and V. And so if we say, okay, that one's probably and, because we know that word happens a lot. This CN word needs a vowel, and there's only 2 left. And on is a lot more common than un. So now we've got way more cribs. We now see this one pop up, KHE, and the T is already used. So we know that one's not V, but it is probably she. So we take the K and we know that that's an S. And now we start to see really big cribs, like 1001 Nights is clearly the text here. So we can take those letters and apply them. And now we're getting really rapid progress where we can find, you know, during, when, have, been, ancient, they just kind of pop out to us, right? So what we do at the end of this is we've got the plain alphabet and the ciphertext alphabet, and all of the text is now decrypted. So that's sort of a more substantial frequency analysis example. And this cryptanalysis technique was considered unbeatable for about 800 years. So first we had the code makers coming up with substitution, encryption algorithms based on a key phrase. Everyone thought you couldn't break it. Al-Kindi explains frequency analysis that can break it pretty quickly. And now the code makers are back on the defensive. So for the next 800 years, people thought, okay, you can't beat frequency analysis, so I guess secrecy is dead. But in that 800 years, some techniques came out that were trying to defeat frequency analysis. So one was homophonic substitution cipher, where they would take multiple cipher symbols per plain text letter. So realizing that the frequency of letters is what was being used in frequency analysis attacks, you could construct a new cipher key, like this one below, where you have lots of different symbols for E and A and O and the letters that are very common, so that each ciphered letter would only make up about 1% of the text. So this was pretty good, still kind of vulnerable to frequency analysis in some ways, but this key is really hard to memorize. So this one has the same problem as the totally random cipher alphabets, is now you have this complicated key and you have to write that down, and now you're having to keep this key secret, and okay, now you're back to that problem. In the 15th century, Leon Battista Alberti proposed polyalphabetic cipher algorithms. So the way a polyalphabetic substitution cipher would work is you would have your plain alphabet at the top, you would have one cipher alphabet below it, and you would have another cipher alphabet below that. So if you wanted to encrypt, let's say the word secret, you would start over at the S in the plain text alphabet, and you would use the first cipher alphabet for that S, so it becomes an R. When you want to encrypt the plain E, you jump down to the second cipher alphabet, so now that E becomes an A. And when you want to encrypt that plain C, you go back up to the first one, so that's now a B. And on down the word, you'd have R becomes H, E becomes K, T becomes K. So what you get with this technique is you get these cool false frequencies. So what happens is that E has become both an A and a K, and K is deciphered as either an E or a T. So now you've effectively broken frequency analysis, which is cool. But again, these polyalphabetic ciphers are complex. So this is now your key that you have to memorize or write down, right? So we still have this key problem. The key is complicated. And Alberti invented a machine to help with this, where the outer, it was basically two alphabets, and the outer disk would stay stationary and the inner disk would rotate. And the ciphertext would contain some key letters inside of it to control the rotation as you're decrypting. So this is kind of complicated to follow because the actual plain text is all in Italian, which I don't understand. But La Guerra si farà, what you would do is your plain text is essentially like guerra. So you would keep the stationary ring at this position, and you would, if you put the movable ring, put the A into the starting position, which is at G, then in the ciphertext, you would start it with A to indicate to the person decrypting that they needed to set their ciphertext, they needed to set their disk to A to decrypt the next letters. So then you would look at all of the letters and use Z, G, T, H for that one. And then when you get to another stop, you would say, okay, now I'm going to put a Q into here. And that tells you need to rotate the disk over to the Q position to do the rest of these, right? And so eventually you would get the plain text at the top, and then it would become this ciphertext with these sort of control letters baked into the ciphertext. So the cool thing here is that it's basically unbreakable by human frequency analysis. And this is pretty easy to do with a disk. The drawbacks here is that there's tricks like the R2R, which has to defend against double letter frequency analysis inside of those before you've changed the disk. And that actually exposes those frequencies anyway. And then there's switching logic that's contained in the ciphertext. And we'll see that putting logic into the ciphertext becomes a really, really bad idea. But how would you apply some sort of easy to memorize keyword to this sort of polyalphabetic cipher system? So let's say you have the keyword secret. How would you take a small, easy to memorize keyword called secret and apply it to this? In the 16th century, Blaise de Vigenère created Le Chiffre Inchiffrable, which was a new encryption system that used the Vigenère square. And this is the Vigenère square. So it is essentially the plaintext alphabet at the top, and the first cipher alphabet is the plaintext alphabet, but shifted by 1, and then shifted by 2, and then 3, and then 4, and on down the road. So at the end of it, you basically have the same one again. And so the way this works is you would decide on a keyword, and you would have this keyword that would be repeated for across the top of all of the text. So here we have the keyword is secret, and we have our plain text that we want to encrypt is attack from the south at dawn. So we would start with a cipher that's at the first letter of the keyword, and we would encrypt the first letter of the plain text. We move to a cipher at the second letter of the keyword to encrypt the second letter of the plain text. Much easier to see with an example. So if our keyword is secret, 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 plain text attack from the south at dawn, we want to encrypt that A with the cipher alphabet that is at the S row. So we have our A in the very first column. We jump down to the cipher alphabet that is S, and we see that our A becomes that S. Now we want to encrypt the T, that's the second letter, and the second letter of the keyword that we're using is E. So we jump up to the row that is E, and we look at the column that is T, and we see that it's X. So we turn that T into an X. Now, so for the second T, we're at a new letter of the keyword, which is C. So we jump up to C, and this T now becomes a V, which gives us that cool sort of false frequency thing where we've broken the two T's became different. The two T's became different letters. So you can't just see that X and V are single frequency. So at the end of that process for this text, you would have this ciphertext. Now this was actually unused for about 100 years because it was considered too complicated. And there were some other sort of enhanced substitutional ciphers coming out. One that has a cool story is the Great Cipher of Louis XIV, which was created by the Rossignol family. And then the way this one worked is each number represents a syllable in the language. So they would have 587 distinct numbers, one representing each syllable. So if you had the ciphertext of 124, 22, the plain text of this was actually symbolic, not symbolic, symbol, whatever. So les ennemis would become these numbers. And that cipher actually went unbroken for about 200 years. And one of the cool story there is that by breaking that cipher, we were actually able to learn the identity of the Man in the Iron Mask. So Alexandre Dumas wrote Man in the Iron Mask before the cipher had been broken. And it has a lot of speculation about who was it? Was it a family member? Was it a twin? Was it a, all that other kind of stuff. But yeah, in 1890, when cryptanalysts finally broke the cipher, they discovered that it was, General Bouland was the person who manned the Iron Mask. Okay, so now we're getting close to Industrial Revolution, which is kind of 18th, 19th century, and sort of some big developments during Industrial Revolution. Black chambers. So this is in the 18th century. This was essentially assembly line cryptanalysis. So every European power had one of these, and they were breaking all kinds of monoalphabetic ciphers. So essentially it was still manual, but it was done in sort of a very assembly line type way, where one person would be in charge of seeing the ciphertext and turning it into, using tables, like here's the most common or likely cryptanalysis techniques to go, and they would hand it off to, another line of people that specialize in breaking this or that. And this really encouraged all European powers to adopt the Vigenère square, because these chambers at an assembly line scale were just breaking all of the monoalphabetic ciphers. In the 19th century, in the 1800s, the electric telegraph was invented. And this is another huge sort of effect where a development in communications technology has a big impact on how are you going to encrypt and keep the messages that are sent over this new technology safe. And so this is where we got Morse code that we're sort of familiar with, is that operators of electronic telegraphs or electric telegraphs could still see the plain text messages. So when you see Morse code, this is an encoding. It's not a encryption. So this is just how do you represent the letter A on an electric wire, right? There's no secrecy here. Anyone intercepting these messages could just reverse the encoding from Morse back to English. And again, so then in the late 18th century, and into the 19th century, in 1854, Charles Babbage actually broke the Vigenère square cipher. So he did this without any machinery, which he's kind of known for in our worlds. But he focused on what he realized is that this repeating keyword was a problem. So anytime you have repetition inside of cryptography, that is probably going to be a problem. So his insight was you have the secret, secret, secret keyword, which is repeated on top of your plain text and becomes the ciphertext, which is going to create those false symbol frequencies that we talked about. Like if you encrypt secret, the E becomes an A and a K. And if you look at the ciphertext, the K could be either an E or a T. I'm going to use example again, straight out of the code book. Fantastic book. Everyone should get it and read it. So if you look at a more contrived example of where the keyword is shorter, like king, 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 the plain text is the sun and the man and the moon, and you will get this ciphertext with a Vigenère square. What Babbage realizes is that even though there's the symbol false frequencies, there are still going to be word frequencies. And in this case, because the plain text has the word the in it a number of times, the is enciphered as DPR, but then as BUK, but then it's enciphered as BUK again. So there's a repetition here. And what he realized is that the word is going to be encrypted as the same cipher word when its position is repeated by some multiple of the key length, which sounds complicated, but let's look at an example. So the way he would do this is he would look for repeated sequences of letters, and he would only look at ones where it's 4 or more letters to filter out coincidences. He would measure the spacing between that, and that would help him identify the most likely length of the key. So let's do that real quick. So if we have this ciphertext that we know has been encrypted with Vigenère square, we see all of these different repetitions that are in here. EFIQ, PSDLP, etc. If we look at the cipher word, the repetition, and we look at the spacing between the repetitions, we can basically check off how far apart are these things. So one of them is repeated 95 spaces apart, another one 5, another one 20, another one 120. And so the common factor in all of those is 5, which tells you that your key word is 5 letters long. So what Babbage would then do is he would actually break the ciphertext up into 5 different pieces of ciphertext. And then he would break each one of those individually with frequency analysis, because in that particular ciphertext, it's been using the same alphabet, right? So this is how he basically was able to break Vigenère square without using any machinery, just a lot of sort of clever tricks and insights. So then there are more encryption systems that were coming out at the time. One was the Veal ciphers, which was published in the 19th century. It described treasure that is buried, I think, basically in Virginia and sort of the New England mountain, or not New England, what is that? That mountain range. Oh my gosh, Appalachian Mountains. And so this is Veal paper number 2. Just a bunch of numbers, very encrypted, all this other kind of stuff. And what happens is that the key is actually the Declaration of Independence. And so the way that the Veal ciphers works is that to decrypt it, you find the word that corresponds to the number in the ciphertext, and then you take the first letter of that word. So if the first number that you see is 115, and the 115th word in the Declaration of Independence is instituted, then that means that that 115 is an I. And so they did this with Veal paper number 2 using the Declaration of Independence, and they found that it described 1,014 pounds of gold and all of this buried treasure. And then Veal cipher, Veal paper number 1 and Veal paper number 3 are supposed to describe where it's hidden. But papers 1 and 3 have actually never been deciphered. So this is sort of an outstanding ongoing puzzle in the cryptography community. Have they been deciphered? Maybe the NSA, maybe somebody else broke them and went and got the treasure and we just don't know about it. Or can they be, maybe this is all a hoax and it's just been, a tease for cryptographers. Another technique that was in the 19th century, pinprick steganography. So in 19th century Britain, letters cost a shilling to deliver every 100 miles, but you could send newspapers for free. So the way people would get free mail at the time is they would take a newspaper and they would put little dots, little pinpricks or little dots under words or letters that were in the newspaper in order to spell out the message that they wanted to send to somebody, and then they would just mail that for free. So kind of a cool hack to get free mail if you happen to be in 19th century Britain sometime. So now we're getting close to the 20th century and radio is invented, and this is a huge one. So radio means that you can send instant messages, in a lot of cases, instant military commands. But the problem with radio is that all of the messages reach all people. So unlike the electric telegraph where the lines could be, installed from London to Paris, or not Paris at the time, but you know what I'm saying. Basically, like, you have control of that line. You have to tap the line in order to read things. Not so with radio. Everybody sees everything. The ADF VGX cipher was World War I. We're not really going to talk about it. But during this time, it was basically discovered or researched, could you have encryption with absolute security? And one-time pad ciphers came out at the time. I'm going to jump back to this if we have time, because I really want to get to sort of my favorite part of this talk. Okay, so one-time pad ciphers were essentially kind of guaranteed secrecy, but they were a giant pain in the butt to try to use. And so they went unused because there was actually a breakthrough in mechanical encryption. And this is probably the one a lot of people have heard of. If you think about the Vigenère square that has 26 cipher alphabets, and we sort of saw how hard it can be to break that. In the 20th century, we got Enigma, which was not just electric, but electrical encryption. So Arthur Scherbius invented Enigma in 1918, and it went for mass production in 1925. And the way Enigma works is it has this keyboard for plain text at the bottom. The magic of Enigma is that it had these rotors and a reflector disk, and it also had a plug board that when you push down on a key, it would complete a circuit through all of that. And then there was this lamp board for ciphertext. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here, this is the keyboard, and then this up here is the lamp board. So you would push down on a letter, and then a light would light up on some other letter, and that would tell you what you needed to, what your plain text letter became what ciphertext letter. So this is the inside of one of the rotors, and the rotors have that green mess there. Is probably the most important part, which is a jumbling, a scrambling of wires from one side of the rotor to the other side of the rotor. So this is a very simplified diagram of how Enigma would work. Enigma's security came from using a bunch of rotors in series, usually 3 or 4, and every time you pushed down on the keyboard, there was a mechanical stepping movement of the rotors. So this would change the circuit path through Enigma every time you punched a letter. That's what gave you the polyalphabetic nature of Enigma. So on the top here, you see the operator has pushed down an A, it's gone through the 3 rotors and the reflector, and it's come back as a G. But the next time the operator pushes down an A, the rightmost rotor has been advanced 1 position, which creates a completely different circuit path. So now the A becomes a C. And this would happen for every single letter type, every single letter that you would press. Now Enigma had 3 rotors of 26 wirings. And using that, you get 17,576 cipher alphabets. And the key would be the starting position of each one. And this is kind of crackable. So if you remember, we're dealing with sort of starting to be the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Age, assembly line cryptanalysis. But a new key was used every day. So if you assume that you could check one orientation per minute, where you simply put the rotors in and you start typing the ciphertext and you see if it's making any sense. If you had one Enigma machine, it would take you 12 days to sort of find the day key. 12 Enigma machines means that you could basically try 12 at a time and you get that down to 1 day, and 24 machines means you would crack it by tea time. But the rotors could be rearranged. So now there's not just these sort of starting positions, but there's also the arrangements. And this bumps it up to 105,000 different cipher alphabets, which is really, really hard. So if you assume the same way of checking that, it would take you 96 Enigma machines to be able to crack an Enigma message in a single day, which is, again, we're Industrial Revolution now. Maybe you can have a black chamber with 96 Enigma machines and try to do this. But then lastly, there was this plug board on the front of Enigma. And so with this, you could swap up to 6 of the 26 letters. And that means there's 100 billion possible plug board settings. So if you multiply all of this together, you're actually looking at 10 trillion possible cipher alphabets. And there's no way. You would need 38 million Enigma machines to just brute force that in a day. Just an electric diagram of Enigma. But the way that the Enigma code books would work is there would basically be these monthly books with a key for each day that would say, put your plug board settings to this, put your rotor arrangement to this, and put your initial rotor orientation to this. And then on top of that, there would be per message keys. So they would only use that day key to send a new rotor orientation first. So the new rotor orientation might be your rotors need to be at A, S, and D. And so if you send that at the beginning of your message with the day key, then ASD, AST might become QWERTY, and the receiver types QWERTY and they see ASD, ASD. Now they change their rotors to A, S, and D for the rest of the message. And this would minimize the amount of ciphertext created by the day key to make it harder to crack. So is this even possible? New key was used every single message. Assume you could check one per minute. You would need those 38 million Enigma machines, and you would only crack a single message of Enigma, not in days worth of message, a single message. Yes, you can crack Enigma. So cracking Enigma starts at the Polish Bureau's Szyfro, which was established in World War I to protect Poland from Russia and Germany. And so they received photographs of the Enigma instruction manual from French espionage. They were able to deduce the rotor wirings and how the codebook was used. And the cryptographer who attacked Enigma was Marian Rejewski. So he led a team that focused on those repeated message keys, because again, repeating the message in any repetition inside of the ciphertext is going to be bad. So what Rejewski realized was that the message keys reveal a letter relationship. So if you see LOKRGM at the beginning of Enigma ciphertext, you know that L and R were the same plain text message. You don't know what it was, but you know that they were. So there's some kind of relationship between L and R. You intercept some more messages and you can start to see in the first 6 letters these other pairings pop up. And you can start to build a table. When the first letter is this, the 4th letter is always this, right? You intercept a ton of messages and you start to have a more complete table that just says when the first letter is this, the 4th letter is this, but it's consistent all day. This is happening. And so what Rejewski found was there were these chains of loops. So if the first letter was an A, the 4th letter would be an F. Then later the first letter is an F, that becomes a W. When a W is the first, A becomes a, and now you're back at the beginning. And so there's 3 links in this chain. And he would see these chains everywhere, right? So these chains kept popping up and they were consistent all the time. And after he looked at enough days, he realized that the number of links in the chain are only caused by the rotors going around. That doesn't, the number of links doesn't change no matter what the plug board settings are. So this means he could detach the problem of the plug board from the problem of the rotors. And so he could attack the 105,000 rotor settings and not the 10 trillion different day keys, which is 100 billion times easier. Still really hard, but 100 billion times easier. So after they looked at enough of these days, they would understand that a certain rotor setting created these chains and a different rotor setting created these. And they invented what's called a cyclometer, which would check every single 105,000 possible settings of the rotors in Enigma. And they used that to create a lookup table. So basically the world's very first rainbow table. So it took a year to go through all of this. But what that meant is that what they could do is they could just count the number of links and chains that are found in ciphertext and Enigma, and they would go over to their catalog and they would know exactly what the rotor settings were. But once you have the rotor settings, how would you find the plugboard settings? And this actually turned out to be a lot easier because, like I said, if you get one foothold into breaking encrypted messages, you usually can find others. And so what they did was sort of what we saw was just basic, breaking any ciphertext. They would unplug all of the plugboard settings. They knew the rotor arrangement and the orientations, and they would start to type in the ciphertext. And they would see something like Clay Hitler. And if you swap the E and the L, then you get Al Hitler. Or they would see Retu, and if you swap the R and the W, you get weather. So now you can basically look for these cribs in the ciphertext, and you can see, okay, this is what the plugboard settings are. This is what the plugboard swaps are. In 1938, the Germans updated Enigma, which made it really, really hard, much harder for the Polish Bureau Schiffer to crack. They did create these cryptographic bombs, which were basically machines for trying all 6 possible rotor arrangements because there were new rotors, more arrangements. And then there were even more updates in 1939, such to the point that Poland just didn't have enough resources to build big enough cryptanalysis bombs to break it. And so on August 16th, Poland smuggled an Enigma and all of their research out to the Allies, and then 2 weeks later, Hitler invaded Poland. So that was picked up at Bletchley Park, which is kind of where we know the Alan Turing story. And they had more staff and resources than the Bureau Schiffer, so they built bigger bombs, and then they also came up with new shortcuts like SILIs, and they realized that the rotors were never used in the same position 2 days in a row, which actually eliminates half of the rotor arrangements. That feels like a security thing, like, oh, if we don't use it 2 days in a row, that'll be good, but you actually, like, counterintuitively, that's worse security. And so we're getting up on our time, so I'm going to stop because I know we have a sponsor break too. But yeah, Alan Turing focused on what would happen if the Germans stopped repeating day keys. And so he noticed that there were these sort of known text cribs in the ciphertext. So a weather report would always include the word weather at a certain position. And so once you know that the ciphertext of ETJWPX is where weather is, then you could try Enigma settings to find which settings make it match that. And so that was what Turing's technique and what Turing's bomb was based on. So British bombs, US bombs, we made our own, and then there were other World War II crypto going on. And then probably the apex point of this is that the Americans built Colossus, which was inspired by Turing ideas in his bomb, but it used electronic valves, which were faster than electromechanical relay switches, and it was now programmable. And so this actually got us to computer crypto, but I only promised to get you up to World War II this time, and I have another longer, less exciting talk that covers all the way up to quantum crypto and quantum cryptanalysis, but we are not going to do that today. So that is the end of this talk. Hopefully you found it interesting, maybe some interesting gems of stories around the history of crypto that maybe you didn't know before. And if you're like me, I think one of the things that learning about this stuff has helped me to understand is, like I said, there's nothing magical going on, and the fundamentals of cryptography are actually like, they fit in our heads, right? Especially if you look at it from the development of the very sort of ancient secret keeping systems up into getting closer to computer crypto. All of cryptography has built on the cryptography that came before. So it's been this decades-long battle of code makers and code breakers going at each other. And so if you want to, I would definitely suggest get the code book by Simon Singh, and then from there do like Khan Academy, crypto, and that will, you still shouldn't invent your own crypto, but at least if you're using crypto, you know more about the fundamentals of it. So that's what I'll leave you with. And I saw some notes flowing by, but I didn't see any questions in Slack, but I will shut up now and let any questions that might want to get in there, get in there.
Awesome. Great talk, Luke. I've been kind of watching for questions as well, and I haven't seen any, but I would say Luke is very active in the Techlahoma chat. Are you still on the board for Techlahoma?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Awesome.
So
Well,
if Kindle's working, should probably pulling out my board membership roll call. Depending, like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Luke is very active, and so if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in there. Otherwise, we can you can follow up with him later. So at this point, we are going to bring on a sponsor for a quick little. We're going to do a 5-minute interview with some of our sponsors, giving them a chance to talk and share their solutions and explain what makes them great. So Luke, thanks for your talk, and we'll catch you in Slack. So, all right, Sean, can you hear me? Sean's connecting here. Give him a second.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Doing good, Sean. Good to see you. This awesome. Is Sean Hanks, right? Did I have that correct?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Yeah. Sean Hanks with Fortinet, and he's going to take just a couple minutes, about 5 minutes, to tell us a little bit about Fortinet, some of the solutions they've got, and what makes Fortinet awesome.
Great. Awesome. Well, I do appreciate the time. So firstly, I would really like to thank the BSides crew for getting this all together. I think the content today has been really, really good. Secondly, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'm going to go ahead and share off my screen here. So what I've done is I've put together a very quick. Oh, actually, it's telling me, hey, can I rejoin this Zoom meeting? It's telling me it needs me to allow access for system preferences.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right back in.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I'm guessing you're on a Mac, right? We'll give him just a minute. Once you try to share the screen, the Mac's going to ask for permissions to make sure that you actually want it to. So we'll give him just a minute to be back. While we're waiting, if you haven't, remember to go join the Techlahoma Slack. Some great conversations going on there in there. There he is. Let's add him in.
Okay, we're back. I'm so sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
Okay, yeah. So what I've done is I've put together just a really, really quick presentation for you guys, and really this presentation should appeal to people who know absolutely nothing about Fortinet to people who are current customers. So my goal today is for everyone to walk away with something new and something that's somewhat exciting for them. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and jump right into the meat of our conversation here. So the part that we will start off with is going to be for everyone to kind of just level set, get on the same page, and talk about how threats have gone from more of isolated type engagements to where maybe 1 or 2 products can get the job done, to now to where we have machine-to-machine attacks. And with a lot of this comes the responsibility of making sure that there is going to be a response for the attack. But even more so, you can see that what this is doing is this is opening up the entire attack surface to, like I said before, very isolated, to you're bringing it into your home with your Internet of Things, thermostats connecting to the internet. Lock systems connecting to the internet. There is no end, and it's going to be moving further, right? So more things are going to be connected. So with those types of problems that are being there are solutions, but sometimes our solutions create other problems without even trying to. So you have a problem and you have a way to resolve that problem. Well, typically there's more than one way to get something done. And sometimes it's the combination of a few different methodologies. So you have your attacks and you have your products, like your point products, things that you're specifically designing and architecting in order to block against said attack. And then what you would really like as a security, for a security posture and for the most up-to-date threat information, is more of a team mentality amongst your technology, as opposed to having a secure email gateway that can do it all, but maybe it doesn't participate in updating endpoints or your firewall or other things in your infrastructure with the latest threat information. Because a lot of these tools were designed to be siloed all-stars that can do it all. So we have our products, we have the solutions, and then there's more than that. As the threat attack surface is expanding, you need constant threat information that's being shared by the guys who actually have the information itself. And I'm not talking about making some logs, but sharing information about indicators of compromise, making sure that they're not able to get on other parts of your network. So with that type of technology, Fortinet itself, we're a cybersecurity company. Some of you may know us as a firewall company. This slide really shows you the fabric, the Fortinet security fabric ready devices that Fortinet ourselves, that we are engineering, we are business to so vendor to business. We're here to help you design solutions, and that's not just firewall stuff. So Fortinet, everything coming from a NAC solution down to your security orchestration and your endpoint response to your very dynamic and cloud deployment. Fortinet is a very and it can be a homogeneous deployment with a greenfield type solution. So we have the ability to tie in a lot of our technology that is unrelated necessarily to an edge firewall getting out, or a user getting out, but even following a user, a phone or something to that nature, protecting against a website, doing sandbox and detonation, things like that. So much more than a fiber, than a security fabric. Right there, you have products that were designed and built to share information, and really the most important piece, and I think this is the most important slide. I know I'm running up on my time. Plus, I bounced out, so please. This is going to be the most important information for some of you who have never heard of Fortinet. Is we have partnerships with a lot of third-party vendors, and that cybersecurity information sharing, that team type of mentality, actually extends to more than likely a lot of your products that you currently have right now. So I have the ability to integrate a lot of my technology that is responsible for doing something other than what maybe a firewall is doing. And I have the ability to tie that into what you currently have, using an automatic, this is an ecosystem that's already been pre-established. So this is all work that's being done by Fortinet and third-party vendors to ensure that security posture and make sure that you have the best security hygiene that you can possibly have. So with that, I know that that's 5 minutes. So I do appreciate everyone's time. If you guys have any questions, or if you want to go deeper into what some of this stuff is with like a quick demo or something like that, please feel free to reach out to me. My name is Sean Hanks, and I'll send that chat information. But once again, thank you guys so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sean. It was good to have you.